Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. In this video, we're going to be discussing the Ministry of Magic, the wizarding world as a whole, and guns. In a world full of powerful spells that bear extreme destructive potential, I've always wondered what the mindset is surrounding guns in the wizarding world. We don't see guns much, and I think that the most notable instance of a wizard showing their attitude towards guns is when Hagrid bends Vernon Dursley's shotgun in the Philosopher's Stone. Hagrid's not even remotely afraid of the gun being pointed at him. But I don't think it's because he feels that he's invulnerable to it. It's because he knows that Vernon is too much of a coward to actually properly pull the trigger and impale him. But that does sort of make me wonder, how destructive could a weapon like a gun actually be in the wizarding world? Surely it wouldn't overshadow magic. Otherwise, witches and wizards would be using guns, just like muggles, right? I did some digging online, and there seems to be a general consensus among many fans that at one point in time, Rowling actually spoke on this matter, revealing that the power of a gun, in many instances, outweighs the power of magic, specifically in the instance of a duel. In a fight between a muggle with a shotgun and a wizard with a wand, the muggle will win. However, I'm really not sure of the legitimacy of this quote. I'd really have to find the exact source to go by this. I'm also not convinced. I think that though a gun could bear some destructive potential, magic is so much more versatile. In the wizarding world, there also never seems to be much of an emphasis placed on the use of guns. It just isn't part of their culture. The Ministry of Magic is a primary form of government in the magical world, at least in the UK, and they are responsible for establishing and upholding all legislation pertaining to the laws of the magical world. Other countries have a similar structure of government, but have different names, i.e. in the US there is MACUSA, the Magical Congress of the United States of America. Like a muggle government, the ministry's responsibilities are vast, as they are the primary body that attempts to sustain law and order in the magical world. And like any system of government, in an effort to cover as much ground as possible, the primary governmental body is systematically divided to focus on different sectors of the wizarding world. There are 10 levels of the Ministry of Magic in total, and the government has been around for a long time, as the Ministry of Magic was preceded by the Wizards' Council, the longest serving form of government that served Britain. The Wizards' Council eventually turned into the Ministry of Magic in the year 1707, as it needed an overhaul. It lacked structure and needed to be brought into more modern times. However, what I've always found interesting about both forms of wizarding government that have existed is that there is no legislation at all pertaining to the use of guns. The closest thing that the Ministry of Magic has is the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, but this is nothing. Guns are a massively controversial item in Muggle government, and there is boatloads of legislation surrounding the possession, handling, use, and trade of guns. Given that the first recorded use of a firearm was in 1364, one would expect that there would be something more in place to control the use of such deadly weapons, not just nothing at all, which is what it looks like. We know that witches and wizards are not impervious to traditional physical harm. They get hit by things, think bludgers, and often they aren't physically different than a muggle. They have the same skin, the same nerve endings, and they are just as vulnerable as a regular person. Bearing this in mind, then I think it's a safe bet to say that witches and wizards also wouldn't be invulnerable to bullets. Given that witches and wizards possess the ability to turn objects into projectiles, think Voldemort and the glass in the Ministry Atrium, who is stopping them from just grabbing, say, a gun and using that? Wouldn't that be more convenient? First of all, I think the primary reason that guns aren't used by the large majority of witches and wizards is the fact that it's just, as I mentioned earlier, not a part of their culture. They don't exist anywhere, they're not advertised, no one owns them, there's no legislation surrounding them, and certainly no one is using them. They grow up in a world entirely devoid of weapons like that. And I suppose that aspect of Muggle culture just never found its way in. However, we know of course that in addition to the witches and wizards that have spent their entire lives in the wizarding world, there are also witches and wizards that grew up in the Muggle world and spent a considerable amount of time there before attending Hogwarts. Presumably, these witches and wizards are at least familiar with Muggle technology, like guns. So if anyone were to consider using a weapon like a gun, then these would be the people. So why don't these half-blood and Muggle-born witches and wizards spice up the battle against the Death Eaters and pull out some guns? I think that one of the main reasons that guns are never used is because witches and wizards don't want to adopt that part of Muggle society, or many other parts of Muggle society for that matter. The primary goal of the Ministry of Magic and wizarding government is upholding the Statute of Secrecy, which upholds the divide between Muggle and magical worlds. This is best explained by Hagrid to Harry in the Philosopher's Stone. Ministry of Magic messing things up as usual. There's a Ministry of Magic? Of course. They wanted Dumbledore for minister, of course, but he'd never leave Hogwarts, so old Cornelius Fudge got the job. Bungler if there ever was one, so he pelts Dumbledore with owls every morning, asking for advice. But what does a Ministry of Magic do? Well, their main job is to keep it from the muggles that there's still witches and wizards up and down the country. Why? Why? Blimey, Harry. Everyone would be wanting magical solutions to their problems. Nah, we're best left alone. What this means is that, among all other things that the Ministry handles, their ultimate responsibility is to ensure that there is a harmonious and distinctly segregated relationship with the Muggle world. Secrecy is of utmost importance. However, in this passage, Hagrid seems to suggest that the Statute of Secrecy is upheld because Muggles would want things from witches and wizards. They'd want magical solutions to their problems, and who knows what would come with that. However, I am of the stance that the Statute of Secrecy is primarily upheld out of fear. In Dumbledore's copy of The Wizard and the Hopping Pot, a short story written by Beetle the Bard that focuses on wizarding Muggle relations, he scribbled in his own notes that read, "As the witch hunts grew ever fiercer, wizarding families began to live double lives, using charms of concealment to protect themselves and their families. By the 17th century, any witch or wizard who chose to fraternize with Muggles became suspect, even an outcast in his or her own community." What this tells us is that, preceding the 17th century, the world was very much wide open. The presence of witches and wizards was well known to Muggles. And did Muggles welcome them into their society? No, they hunted them down. And this is what effectively coined the term witch hunt. They didn't praise them for their magical ability and welcome them with open arms. They hunted them down because they were different, because they were freaks. When the Ministry of Magic formed in 1707, proper regulation was put in place and began to separate the two worlds. And the wizarding community wanted to distance themselves from Muggles as much as possible. This meant adopting as little from their culture as possible, and this would include guns. Wands are distinctly a witch and wizard's item. It's not anything that a Muggle would have any use for, and I think that by sticking with wands and avoiding guns, witches and wizards are holding on to a piece of their identity. Like the way that purebloods are disgusted with the notion of Muggle and wizard breeding, I would imagine that it would be a huge faux pas to take advantage of Muggle technology. I think that on some level, witches and wizards know that if Muggles wanted to take over, they could. They are much weaker individually, and they rely on technology, but they massively, and I mean massively, outweigh the wizarding population. They also happen to have technology that does put them on more of a level playing field. Hogwarts, which is the primary introduction to the wizarding world for Muggleborns, seems to place a huge emphasis on the importance of the divide between the two worlds, and I think this is for good reason. They're taught very early on that they are two completely different places, and need to be treated as such. You can't bring Muggle values into the wizarding world in the same way that you can't bring wizarding values into the Muggle world, and I think that they know on some level that using a gun, or any powerful Muggle technology for that matter, would cause imbalance. The introduction of a powerful weapon, like a gun, to the wizarding society would cause it to implode. I think that the morally righteous witches and wizards know not to use them for this reason. They understand the importance of separation, and I think the morally dubious witches and wizards would never touch them out of contempt. A Death Eater would be disgusted by the prospect of using Muggle technology. And that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. What do you think? Why don't witches and wizards use guns in Harry Potter? Let me know down in the comment section below. Until next time, you're a wizard, Harry.